Good afternoon, everyone. We are so thrilled to be here today. And we were just joking, we are not going to talk about AI today. No, we're not. On principle, we're not. But I'm Polly Spiros, and I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Fuel Cycle, which is a technology research tech platform that enables integrated research, integrated insights. It's a thrill to see all the exciting things that our clients are doing with their research, the ways that they're getting creative, the way that they're driving human connections. And one of the things I love about my job, and I've been doing this job a long, long time, for those of you who might have more in front of your career than I do, one of the amazing things about the work that we do here in our industry is it's never the same day after day. And if you're open to it, you can learn something literally every hour of your day. And one of the things I've loved learning is more about not only you, Sarah, but the work you do.
Well, I mean, coffee is a really fascinating space. So I'm Sarah Snudden. I currently work at JDE USA, which is a part of JDE Peets. I'm not the Peets, I'm the JDE part, but I love the Peets. Before that, I was at Quirk, where I worked on a lot of different coffee brands. But I worked into coffee after trash bags and food storage and laundry stains at Clorox. So there's a lot of opportunities if you've got the curiosity and empathy to find the surprises everywhere. But I'm grateful to be in coffee at this stage. We were thinking about coffee and how to kick off. And how many of you had a coffee today? All right, keep your hand up if it was iced. Put your hand back up if it was hot. And was it like black coffee, or was it with all the black coffee? Or now put it down, all the fixings?
Ooh, all the fixings.
Yeah.
We got a few of those today.
Yeah.
Good.
Here's an even better question. When you think about your typical coffee, raise your hand if this was your typical coffee, or because we're in New York in a conference, was it your special coffee or something different? All right,
Yep.
all right.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's a lot there in the coffee space, and
I got one.
Yeah.
Was it out of a can or in a cup? Can?
Can?
Cup. Great. Okay.
All right.
If you were in a grocery store, would it ever be out of a can? Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Flavored? Oh, I got one. Flavored? Ooh.
All right.
Okay. Flavored. It's a gateway. It's the gate. You said the gateway drug.
I was saying flavored coffee is often kind of a gateway to the larger coffee world. How many of you? This is harder, but thinking on a regular week, do you make coffee at home? Wow, that's a good amount. Or do you go out for coffee? All right. And when you make coffee at home, do you use a pod or capsule? Or do you do the beans, the ground beans? Mm-hmm. All right, got a good mix.
Okay.
Oh, last one. Do you use espresso or do any sort of shots of straight espresso? All
Or
right.
shots of espresso in your coffee.
Well, yeah. All right. Some of us are those people.
So that really interesting. Now, how many of you put your hands up multiple times? Yeah. And this is the multi-layered consumer. So JDE, a pure play company. They only do coffee, they do tea. But you can imagine the layers and dimensions of the choices that the JDE or coffee or tea consumer makes in a week's time, where you are, what you're doing, what's convenient. And that really drives sort of how you make your decisions. And so, Sarah, I'm curious also, in the last 20 or so years, your space has just expanded tremendously, right? So we have, we've gone from sort of, I'm thinking after church coffee when I tasted it for the first time at like the social, right? You tasted your mom's coffee.
You get a donut with that sometimes.
That's terrible, right? Or a temple, whatever.
Yeah.
That's terrible. To going to like trying coffee in college and maybe trying flavored and maybe going to black because you could never be sure how old the cream was in your sorority house refrigerator. So, but now we have frozen, blended, all kinds of platforms that enable us to make coffee drinking available to a huge, huge audience with a myriad of different tastes. So my question to you is, how do we get to that multi-layered, multi-dimension decision maker among a vast, vast number of options? How do you dig in?
Yeah, well, I will say that one of the tools that's been great for us, because really understanding like all the different need states and all the different decisions that you make about what coffee you drink and when you drink it have really been enabled by having a community. And one of the tools or one of the reasons that a community is really great for us is we've got core groups of those different drinkers or those people with different behaviors, those nuances, and it enables us to really go in when we have a question sort of in the moment or a bigger question that we could see coming, but it gives us that ability to both be strategic and plan ahead, but also get that incremental bit of data when we're trying to figure out something about a new brand or a new form or a new occasion.
So when you have a consumer, though, that has really, contingent on where they are, how they're feeling, what they're doing, when they have multi-dimensions to their consumption, how do you distinguish their behavior in one setting from another? What is the mechanism that you're using so that you can identify this tea brewer in the afternoon with this heavy, like, black coffee with a shot of espresso in the morning?
Yeah. So one of the things that, is kind of at the core of an insights, the heart of it really is getting to know your consumer over time. And being able to do that is also kind of like a relationship. And people's relationship with coffee changes across their times of day. And as you kind of start to spot those patterns and see those times what are the triggers for an iced coffee occasion versus a hot coffee occasion, and those are different for different people. So really being able to layer on and go in and find people in our community who do this and do that to kind of ask about these new ways of putting things together is so critical for us.
But do you do that in one study? I mean, your questionnaire can be so long, right? So your instrument, it gets to be a point where you can do some qual to better understand, but then if you really want to measure, your instrument has to be doable, right?
Yeah.
15 minutes or so, you'll dry fatigue. Even talking about coffee, people get tired. So the question I have is, how do you manage to kind of use these data points and layer them over time?
Yeah.
Because coffee consumption changes with your demos, right? They change with your demos. I couldn't afford coffee and a shot of espresso every morning 20 years ago. That would probably have cut into my budget. But now it's different. So the question I have for you, over time, how do you layer those dimensions?
I mean, so obviously there's the part where you kind of get better at finding those patterns, but in order to find them, you very much have to think about going in and understanding how those pieces fit and finding how you the implications for what it means in terms of the action or the communication that you're going to put out there to try to drive action. And I feel like being able to get to know people over time is really where that starts to pay out. I love the fact that with community type learning, it's not transactional in the same way. You're really getting that relationship over time. And I feel like that piece of really gives you the ability to kind of get more confident at finding those things in market, because you know the relationship that you're in and you know the role you're playing. And you know the role that the other people, the other brands, the other propositions are playing too.
Yeah. And so when we talk about AI, we talk about technology. How does technology enable deeper understanding, right? Because a practitioner drives a human connection. I will believe that until I'll believe that as long as I work, that insights drive human connection and human understanding. So how can technology drive that further? And the idea is, over time, to have an automated profiling engine. We call it an engine because we're fuel cycle and everything has to do with an engine or ignition, something like that. But it's really, basically, it's an automated segmentation built into the technology. And Fuel Cycle is not the only technology that has this. This is one example. But it's one of the things that I think is important in terms of how do you enhance your human connection with technology. And if you can drive a progressive profiling system where, based on the answer to one question, you can group or cohort that respondent. You can cohort them in different ways. They answer a question based on time. That answer to that question can be layered into their profile. You answer a question based on occasion. You can layer that into. So all of a sudden you have this cohort of people that have multiple dimensions and multiple layers, and you can segment them and ask those questions to each individual group. So how do you leverage this? Like, what are the ways that you differentiate your inquiry among all of those different slices, the way you cut that data over respondents?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's most amazing is the speed, right? So like sometimes you get that question from someone in senior leadership that's like, I want to understand this, and being able to layer those points in and say like, all right, I want someone who drinks this brand, who drinks it over ice, and I need to hear how they're thinking about the other brand choices they make. And I can have that right away because it's so fast to be able to make that exact answer pop out. And you can get the clips of what the consumers have to say and get them into the presentation for senior leadership by the next morning or by the next Monday.
So I love hearing that. So one of the things that I think insights professionals, practitioners, we think we know the customer. I mean, first of all, that sometimes they say, what's a crystal ball? What's going to happen next? What's going to stick, right? Leadership always wants to know what's going to stick. I can't answer what's going to stick, but I can say I know the customer. I know our customer. How are you able to take those insights that you can drive quickly? Mm-hmm. How do you recommend conveying those to brand management, senior leadership, product management? What are some of the experiences that you've had that have worked?
One, make sure they've had their coffee first before you present. No, but the voice of the consumer, as we all know, is really one that is so important if you're trying to create a brand experience that's really going to be the gift of understanding, that interaction with your product that's way more than transactional, that really has the ability to create love and an experience that's meaningful and a relationship that endures across like new brands and new flashier coffee propositions that might come into the market. And so when I think about presenting to senior leadership, one is just being able to get that consumer voice out to them in the way that the consumer would say it, because it's really the difference of being the person who's kind of paid to know something versus hearing it straight from the person who's the one you're trying to have the relationship with. And I feel like that is always so compelling in whatever form it gets teed up, whether that's an actual video clip or whether that's quotes. I'm lucky to work for a general manager, CEO, who is almost the kind of person, and this is unusual at that level, who's just like, I want to read all the verbatims. And I know in an AI world, like we're all being asked to summarize, and it's a critical life skill, but like really getting in and reading those verbatims. She'll also ask me for the tabs sometimes because she wants to see how that answer looks across like the full survey. She wants to know, all right, if they say this, how do those pieces look for the rest of how do the rest of the pieces fit into this puzzle that we're trying to figure out?
Yeah, and that's a great way to describe it as a puzzle. Now, JDE, 4,000 servings of coffee per second. Second.
To be fair, the company's huge. I work on a brand that's much smaller. But I've worked on really big brands too, and we all go through our career and have different opportunities to work on different things at different times. One of the interesting challenges right now is I'm taking a brand that's in France and in Europe and translating that for the US audience, which is also a pretty special challenge. And when we have to kind of have the conversations globally about, there's things, for instance, like iced coffee in the US is a very different thing than iced coffee in a lot of other parts of the country. So when I'm working with product development scientists, when I'm trying to explain to them, and I show them the pictures of the actual glasses of ice and how big they are, they're kind of blown away. Like sometimes it takes repetition to really get those insights home. When you're working, right now I'm working in a very espresso-led culture, but I'm in the US, which tends to be more drip coffee focused. And I think about just the difference in size, between little espresso cups and big, gigantic American-sized coffee. It's, it takes a few times, I think, for my colleagues who are not in the US to really see it, and having that real voice of the consumer and being able to show how those pieces fit together for a US person is so critical.
Yeah, and Sarah, when we were talking earlier, that's when you said you have to dig in deep, but you have to provide context, right?
Yeah.
Because context provides clarity. So in our business, we look to gather, we look to distill, we look to inspire. And that third part of our job as practitioners, as researchers, is really probably the most inspiring, when really you are able to take an insight that you have and share it and give context to new learning. I'm also curious about something even more kind of tactical, which is you've shared that you have a regular cadence with your stakeholders. I think that's a great best practice too.
I forgot to advance the slide. I'm just, winging it.
I think that's a best practice.
Yeah.
If you could share kind of how you've set up this system of delivering insights and delivering context to your groups. You have kind of a weekly meetup, which is, I think, very unique.
We get together with the actually we do a couple of different meetings. We've got kind of the innovation team that we meet with and our marketing team. And it's really driven a ton of engagement, because while we're kind of the, almost like the yenta, the matchmaker, the person who, creates the interaction with the consumers, like, I think once the marketing team, once the product development team gets a taste of sort of the guidance and the direction and the inspiration and the vitality it brings to kind of hear from the real people and what they need and how that context comes together, how they're making decisions about coffee at like first thing in the morning versus in the afternoon, and what those different occasions are. How they're using coffee as recipes, how we're looking at content or user-generated content and getting those reactions, how we're building packaging or looking at sort of what stands out to them about a certain initiative we're driving. It's been really great, and having those meetings kind of built in gives us that opportunity to really create the value for the consumer voice and also kind of bring that value into the business bottom line.
I think that that's really important, because if you do invest in an online community or a private online panel, because about 40% of our customers at Fuel Cycle, they don't see it as a community, they see it as a private online panel that they've cultivated and built. Honestly, I think that some of the value may be lost if you don't have that regular cadence of insights delivery to your stakeholders. Because if you're doing 4 foundational studies a year, then that's really probably not an appropriate use case. And those foundational studies are important, along with a larger protocol of sort of this continuous research. But if you do have the speed of business where you're able to go out to these consumers that you have identified as your cohort, as your target, and ask them questions on a regular basis to understand their usage and really whatever industry you might be in context, you need that really cadence of delivering those insights all the time. So it's an ongoing iterative conversation with your stakeholders.
Yeah, and I'd actually say that a little bit differently, because I feel like foundational studies to me are ones I ideally don't want to have to repeat that often. Like ideally, I want to have the foundational study in place that gives me sort of my north, south, east, and west of what consumers are looking for. But then I'm able to bring to life different sort of specific locations on that map through the community. I'm able to kind of go in and test and learn and see like if new products or new things are coming onto the broader landscape of coffee, how I can kind of double check, is that behaving as I hope it would? And in a way, it saves me from having to repeat foundational learning. It gets me away from having to do gigantic, big tracker studies, because I've got my cornerstones set, and then I can kind of operate within that space to kind of bring to life whatever's happening in the moment. And by doing that, it's a much more vibrant way of kind of getting the most current news out to my organization.
And more efficient. You don't have a single-use data point. So something that's becoming really, really interesting is single-use data points. You do these massive sort of studies, and then you distribute them, you talk about them, and then they might go on a shelf, and you kind of have this single use where you can continue to iterate on a particular data point. You can continue to test it. You can continue to tweak it and see where there are other kind of cohorts that parallel or that layer on top without like the expense of a massive additional study. And so I think that's the single use, no pun intended, single use serving. The single use data point, I think, is becoming something that we've become very aware of, because I don't need to tell everyone here that all of us are being asked to do more with less budget. Budget is probably my customer's biggest challenge. I'm always like, when I meet them, I'm like, you mean you don't have an unlimited budget? Oh, that's too bad. All the other customers I work with have unlimited budgets, where we know that's not true. And so the ability to take data points that you can deliver and surface over time and do a continual journey of inspiration, building and layering on the dimensions of your consumer, that's what's really exciting about the work you can do. Now, if you're
let me stop you there, because I think the excitement is, so single use is one way of looking at it, but if you come at it from the outcome piece, so I feel like, I've been in this insights game for a while, and a lot of times the really biggest ahas are not the ones that come from one single study. It's often when you overlay different studies, and the tricky part about that is that if you have to go out and recreate the wheel, each time you want to, you get done with the survey and you're like, oh, I wish I would have asked this. You've got the way to kind of do that, embedded in the whole fiber of community. My favorite example of this one is actually from my old Clorox days. We got a big, massive survey that the ad agency, DDB, used to do, and it was really beyond the scope of what you'd typically ask as a CPG company. They were asking, like, what kind of stuff you stream, and do you smoke cigarettes, and if so, do you like filtered or unfiltered? And then they would overlay these data points with like Pine Sol, and so we found out we were in this big phase where we were making. If you go ask consumers at large what they would like a cleaner to smell like, the most common answer is a light, fresh scent. It sounds good. But then, we were just about to kind of move this pipeline, because Pine Sol's really got not a light, fresh scent. It's a strong, powerful scent. And so as we were kind of debating what to do with the brand, we got back this study from the ad agency that said these users like unfiltered cigarettes and Tabasco and like all these very strong things. And there's that moment where without that empathy or without that relationship, you think, wow, unfiltered cigarettes and Tabasco sauce, that sounds like a real character.
Probably a double shot of espresso drinker too.
Yes, probably. But when you got out and like started finding out more and building that relationship with them, and you go out in home or you see their pictures or you hear their own words about what they're doing, showing that they were clean, that they had their act together, was a badge of honor for them. Yeah. And so Pine Sol's really big punch in the nose smell was like, for them, like the thing that they most wanted out of the brand experience. So understanding how those layered bits, what they really mean, what the implications, is really what a community enables us to do. Because Pine Sol isn't the brand that should be a light, fresh scent. There's a lot of other brands that do that really well. And it's those layers and being able to really get underneath things that maybe don't make sense, but do if you dig a little deeper.
And when you say dig a little deeper, I mean, is that a confidence thing as well? I mean, so, I'm really like, I saw you've been doing this a long, long time, and I have too, but, when you're triangulating data, and when you're able to cross data, whether it's longitudinal or different cohorts, where do you know that you're like, I see that insight? rather than, ooh, could that be an insight? Could that not be? How do you know what to share? What, is it a hypothesis? Can you talk a little bit about that thought
Maybe
process?
that's an interesting implication of our fast, like so much data, so much AI, is synthesis is really like at the core of really getting at those bigger ahas, the ones that really, again, take a few layers to get to. And again, though, I think it comes back, like you get your confidence from really seeing the consumer in action and having that longer term relationship. I think what's great about communities is if you've got a branded community, you're able to, you're helping them build the relationship with the brand. If you're doing an unbranded community, you're getting that sense of how different people in love with different brands, or who use different brands, or who have transactional relationships with different brands. You're getting that sense over time, and that's ultimately, I think, what gives you the confidence to make those calls.
That's a really great insight. And the other thing I'll throw out there, and look, I'm not trying to, Fuel Cycle happens to do this, and there are others that can, but you're also able to do, there's technology that enables you to do a branded and unbranded experience within the same space. So if you are looking into a community or online private panel, one of the questions that you might want to ask is, can I do both branded and unbranded in the same space? So that's an FYI.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's the thing about having a community is like they interact with each other. So you've got the people, I mean, social media works like this too. Sometimes if, a challenge comes up and, defenders of that brand will like say, oh, well, here's why I think it's this way. And you have that debate, or you get those insights really organically as people are kind of advocating for what they like or what they love in life. Yeah. Do we want to go to our conclusions page?
Yeah, let's do it.
We're getting to that.
I think we're getting to that time, and maybe we'll have some questions. Okay, I'll take the first one. So one of the things that you want to do when you're thinking about being consumer-centric is absolutely understand that it's going to take commitment and time.
I mean, it's a relationship.
Yeah.
Like, if you're really going to have a relationship, it's probably not 5 minutes and done.
And I also think that we get back to that gather, distill, inspire. You say, oh, I spend quality time with my targets. No, you're not going to know them if you don't spend quantity time with your targets, because they shift, they change.
And the world changes around them.
That's right. You can't dip your toe into the same river twice. Different river, different toe. Mark Twain.
Oh. I was okay. I'm just going to jump in. It's really hot in New York.
It's really hot in New York. No, but it's, and there's two rivers here. Yeah, Mark Twain. Consumers make decisions amongst a vast number of options. Being able to dig in and understand is critical. Yep. You've talked about that in terms of being able over time to really continue to ask some different questions. And then the deepest, most business-driving insights typically come from synthesis and triangulation.
Yeah, if you just stop with like unfiltered cigarettes and Tabasco sauce, you've really missed the bigger implication.
You missed the Pine Sol moment. Yes. Communities make data investments more sustainable, and you're able to minimize repetitive one-off studies.
Yeah, and I think that's really important too, because I am experiencing some challenges in my own world right now where, again, sometimes when you're a country as part of a global team, like different who pays for what's can happen in sometimes not good surprise ways. And having that community to go to in a world where other things, other hungry business needs may be coming for the funding I have, having that community as kind of an established thing provides some security, against sort of the times when maybe you need to balance your business's money in a different way.
Absolutely, and that never happens, does it? Where budgets shift, and we get to the second half of the year, and all of a sudden, a third of it is gone. Right.
So it is. Up for the second
it definitely, half. So we all are. It is important, I think, to understand that at least in some way, being able to continue to do research and to continue to pursue that journey to understand your consumer. However you can do that to continue to deliver insights to your stakeholders is important, and communities might provide you a way to continue to do that even in times of budget constraints.
Yeah, and the way I tie that all back together is with the community, you've built that relationship with your internal stakeholders and the different teams, and they start to become more aware and connected with the consumers. And then as the world kind of moves forward, you've got that sort of balance that kind of helps you kind of protect the voice of the consumer in your organization.
I love it. I'm your biggest fan. Sarah Sudden, thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation today and for all the work you do in our insights industry. I think we have some time for questions. We might have a few minutes if anybody is.
Yeah. Oh, you could do that. That was at the beginning.
I'm Polly Spiros, P-O, I'm just kidding.
All of us Snudden.
Yeah.
All right, any other, yes?
You spoke about trying to translate insights from Europe over to the US and speaking about kind of the communities. Do you have split communities across different countries, or do you centralize them based on, France, Germany, UK,
Yeah.
and then how do you kind of manage the translation?
Great question.
It is a great question. So I'm actually working on a growth initiative that's kind of separate from the main, which makes it a little bit high risk, high reward. Pete's is a separate team based out of California. I'm based out of Boston. And I think right now, globally, certain markets or regions play differently. I think there's a lot of great examples here at the conference of organizations that have found those harmonies across the globe. I think there's a time and a place for all of it. And right now I'm in a place where we're operating a little bit separately for all the right reasons. And then trying to kind of show back into the bigger global organization what's possible is sort of how I try to play.
So any good kind of online panel provider, community provider is going to have options for anyone who's working in multi-languages to, provide contextual native language spaces, and then they should also be able to provide a toggled multi-language experience, which is a more tech-enabled solution, which most of us that are practitioners know how important it is to do research in the native language, right?
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that, I think, especially for consumers to understand, so there's lots of options. Any good provider is going to be able to provide lots of options for that.
Yeah. Oh.
It's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah.
We missed that. We didn't bring that up. That's great.
I think actually one of the things I like about the Fuel Cycle platform is I think about how I set up sort of the diet of studies, or as I kind of create the ecosystem within the panel, is there's kind of questions that are more engagement oriented, where you've got the immediate feedback. So I don't even have to make a newsletter, because if you're engaging with those questions, and we try to really be thoughtful about what are sort of the lighter, faster, more engaging moments that I do sometimes use when I have to profile or when I have to figure out something, but it keeps that engagement up for those respondents. And then there's other times when we do share back something that may be a more layered or nuanced finding as well. But I think a lot of times the pieces that panelists like are that more instant gratification. I mean, even though I just talked about a relationship over time, part of it is answering the question and then seeing how you compare it to other people, or when you take a typing test in a magazine or an online survey, where it's which one are you? And it kind of comes back and you get some feedback, and there's that really good interaction dynamic. And of course, there's times when we kind of want to keep people's interactions, more separate, so we can, see where they're coming from without the bias of seeing others. And there's lots of occasions, though, in a space like coffee, where we can kind of put it out there.
So I do think that there's, in the consumer space, there may be more options, but we've always known, fortune is being able to get a remuneration for your participation is one important thing. Fame, having your voice heard, and then finally facts, being able to get some facts about the study that you participated in, whether that be a chart or, hey, here's 40% of the people that responded just like you did. So I think that's a way to, that framework, that always kind of plays out.
And I think with that, we're pretty...
Yeah, we have one
more.
more.
One more? All right.
All the panel members exclusive to one client, or do they tend to be a part of different?
Oh, well, so there's what I do now, and there's different ways of doing it. And I've done different things with different different community partners over time for sure. So when I was at Quirk, I had a Quirk Insiders that was very Quirk focused. But one of the nice things about doing that way was Quirk is like its own brand platform. There's different K-cups and different coffees that go through a Quirk machine. So it was a way that we could essentially, get insights directly back to the people, like we know your drinkers, and we could come back as we were negotiating or talking with different brands to be like, here's what we can show you about Cafe Bustelo versus Dunkin', or Green Mountain versus Donut Shop. And so I think there's also times when you can have an unbranded community and you've got people saying like, I love my Nespresso Virtuo, and someone else is saying, I love my Keurig. And so there's a lot of different ways you can play it, but I love that it's flexible, and there can be all sorts of strategies behind how you set it up.
And also, I don't know if you so you own the panel, but I mean, it's like the respondents in a particular community, they belong to the owner of the community. So in the JDE community, for instance, they're just Sarah's to do with and interrogate how she wants to. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that's interesting too when you get to know them is you start to get those pictures and you really start to see. One of the most interesting times I can think of is when people had this idea of like everyone who buys this system is, really shiny, fancy, and then you'd see the actual and you're like, all right, they've got the same qualities, but it's not quite so, I think as you try to understand consumers, your first tendency is to try to get the breaks or to get the segments to be really clean. And the reality is life is kind of messy and more overlapped than you want it to be. And I think getting the ability to show the pictures or hear the voices really helps the internal business get better at like getting that real, like, who are we in the relationship with Claire.
So on behalf of Fuel Cycle and JD, thanks so much for being with us and spending this time with us. Come see us at our booth where we're, what's our booth number?
620.
620. We're across from Fern, and we're going to have Palomas there later. Come and join us. If you have any additional questions, we'd love to talk to you some more. Thank you.
Thanks.